Daytona Beach, Florida, April 4th, 2018. A commercial check ride, 5 minutes old, 900 feet and climbing. The left wing came off the airplane. 2 men died before it reached the ground. A 25-year-old taking his commercial test. A 61-year-old examiner in the right seat with 27,600 hours in his logbook. The wreckage spread 450 feet across the ground. The separated left wing came to rest 270 feet beyond the first piece of debris. And no one could see the crack that killed them. Not from inside the airplane, not from outside it, and not by any inspection the FAA required that morning. What came out of that wreck was an airworthiness directive on the Piper Cherokee. It also produced a number. Your airplane has one right now. The FAA will not show you how it got that number. Have you ever tried to find out where your own airframe stands on one of these rules? Tell me what you found in the comments. This is what Sky Ranch does. Subscribe so you catch the next one. Start with the airplane, because the airplane matters. The accident aircraft was a Piper Arrow, tail number November 106 Echo Romeo. It belonged to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. It had 7,690 hours on the airframe. It also had 33,276 landings. Run that division. 4.33 landings for every single hour it flew. A privately owned Cherokee does 1 landing an hour, maybe 2. This airplane was doing 4. That is not flying. That is a hammer hitting the same nail, 33,000 times. The maintenance logs recorded 18 separate hard landing events over its life. The training profile kept it below 2,500 feet for most of its hours. Power off 180s. 5 to 8 takeoffs and landings on a single lesson. Now look at where it broke. The main wing spar is the steel and aluminum beam that carries the whole weight of the airplane through the wing. It bolts to the fuselage. At that joint, the bolt holes are the highest stressed points in the entire structure, and it is not just any bolt hole. 3 Cherokees have shed a wing since 1987. Every one of them cracked in the same place, the outboard forward hole on the lower spar cap. On the Daytona airplane, it even has a name in the report. LC1. A crack starts at a bolt hole. It grows a fraction of a thousandth of an inch on every landing. It does not care how the airplane looks. Fresh paint hides it perfectly. There is a reason the crack starts there, and the FAA put it in writing in 2024, 6 years after Daytona, 3 years after the rule. Cold bending the spar to achieve the wing's dihedral, the agency wrote, is likely a significant contributing factor in the cracking. Here is what that means on the shop floor. A wing sits at an upward angle, and the factory gets that angle by bending the finished spar cap cold. No heat, no annealing, just force on the bench. Bend aluminum cold and you lock stress inside the metal. That stress never relaxes. It sits at the bolt hole and waits for the landings to arrive. The floor goes in at the factory. Nothing you did put it there. And the National Transportation Safety Board report on this accident does not mention spar manufacturing once. By the time the wing let go, more than 90% of the spar cap cross-section was already fatigue fracture. The metal had been failing for years. The National Transportation Safety Board wrote the sentence that should stop every owner cold. The location of the cracking, they said, would have prevented visible detection from the interior or exterior of the airplane. You could not have found it, neither could your mechanic. That is the part that makes this story serious rather than sensational. I have read a lot of scare pieces about this spar. Most of them skip the next fact. And the next fact is the one that justifies everything the FAA did. There was a second airplane. November 104. Echo Romeo sat on the same ramp, in the same fleet, flying the same syllabus. 7,660 hours. 33,288 landings. 29 fewer hours than the airplane that crashed. 12 more landings. When they pulled it apart, they found fatigue cracking in the same bolt hole. An Air Force analysis put that wing at less than 2,000 hours from failure. 2 airplanes on 1 ramp, both cracked. one already down. So when the FAA moved, it was not moving on nothing. Hold on to that. The rest of this video looks very different in about 6 minutes, and it only works if you accept that the danger was real. Airworthiness. Directive 2020-26-16 went into effect on February 16, 2021. It covers about 5,440 airplanes on the United States Registry, and it does something unusual. It does not simply say inspect at a certain number of hours, it gives you a formula. Here is where you need to pay attention because this is the part nobody explains. The FAA cannot see how you flew your airplane. It has no way of knowing whether you were teaching commercial students or flying to see your grandchildren twice a month. So it counts the only thing it can see. It counts your 100-hour inspections. A 100-hour inspection is only required when an aircraft carries people for hire or gets used for flight instruction for hire. A private owner never does one, not once in 50 years. So the formula splits your hours into 2 piles. The hours flown under a 100-hour inspection program go in one pile. Everything else goes in the other. Then it treats them completely differently. Your training hours count in full. 1 hour is 1 hour. Your private hours get divided by 17. The FAA calls the result factored service hours. When that number reaches 5,000, you inspect. Now run it. Take a Cherokee with 4,000 hours on the airframe that has never once flown for hire. 0 100-hour inspections. 4,000 divided by 17. 235. Against a threshold of 5,000. That owner is not close. He is not in the same postcode. Solve it the other way, and it gets stranger. A purely private Cherokee reaches the inspection trigger at 85,000 airframe hours. No Cherokee has ever flown 85,000 hours. No Cherokee ever will. The rule in force today, in practice, never touches a privately flown airplane at all. That was deliberate. The cracks sat in the training fleet, so the FAA wrote the formula to find the training fleet. Then September 2024 happened. The FAA published 2 proposals 4 days apart. Together they reached 21,592 airplanes. They would replace the current rule entirely. They keep the same structure. 2 piles sorted by the same 100-hour inspection count. They change one thing. The rule no longer divides your private hours by 17. It multiplies them by 3. Take that in slowly because the arithmetic is doing something violent. A private hour used to count as 1/17th of an hour. Under the proposal, it counts as 3 hours. That is a 51-fold change in how heavily the rule weighs your flying. Nothing physical changed. The wing is the same wing, the rivets are the same rivets, and the logbook has not gained a page. Go back to that 4,000-hour Cherokee. 235 under today's rule, 12,000 under the proposed one. The initial inspection threshold is 3,000. He is 4 times past it. The mandatory Spar replacement point is 14,000. He is 2,000 hours away from being told to replace a wing spar. That owner did not fly a single hour between those 2 numbers. Now do the same thing to the airplane that produced this entire rule. November 106. Echo Romeo flew 7,690 hours, every one of them under a 100-hour inspection program. Under today's formula, it scores 7,690. Under the proposed formula, it scores 7,690. Identical. The number does not move, not by 1 hour. The airplane whose wing came off is completely unaffected by the fix. Which number bothers you more? The one that moved 51 times, or the one that did not move at all? Tell me below. There is a precedent here, and the FAA does not bring it up. This has happened before. In March 1987, a Piper Cherokee lost a wing near Marlin, Texas. 1 dead. The FAA issued an airworthiness directive 29 days later. That rule drove about 560 inspections. Owners pulled more than 20,000 wing attach bolts out of their airplanes. They found 2 cracks. 2 out of 560, 0.537%. On May 22, 1989, the FAA rescinded the directive. Now count today. More than 2,800 eddy current inspection reports have gone back to the agency. Over 100 came back with a positive indication. Piper studied the spars behind those indications. Piper confirmed 3 of them as fatigue cracks. The industry filings put the confirmed number at 6 across roughly 3,100 inspections, 0.194%. Less than half the rate at which the same agency walked away from the same problem on the same bolt hole in 1989. Same airframe, half the cracks. Opposite conclusion, and the heaviest user of these airplanes in the country went on the record about it. ATP Flight School operates 230 aircraft. Its Vice President of Technical Operations filed a comment on the docket in November 2024. 98 inspections completed, 0 cracks found. That is the exact fleet the formula is built to catch, reporting nothing. Piper filed 2, and its objection is sharper than a cost complaint. The company argued that performing the inspection can damage the bolt holes and create the fatigue it is looking for. To make the point, it quoted the FAA's own words from 1989, when the agency wrote that removing tight-fitting bolts can create stress rises. Even the safety board asked the FAA to narrow it. A board member wrote that the risk of disturbing the joint might outweigh the risk of the crack across much of the fleet. The investigators asked for less. The regulator proposed more. So the obvious question is why an owner cannot simply read the rule and work out where he stands. He can. In theory. The formula sits inside the Federal Register, in the proposal, exactly where it should be. The FAA printed it as a picture. Not text and not a searchable line. An image file dropped into the document, marked graphic, TIFF omitted. You cannot search for it. You cannot copy it. You cannot paste it into a spreadsheet. You need the docket number before you start. Then you open a PDF and look at a photograph of some arithmetic. That picture decides whether your wing has a retirement date. 2 people who do this professionally pulled that formula for this video. It came back wrong both times, in 2 different ways, before anyone opened the source document and read the picture. If it takes 3 attempts with the docket number in hand, the 78-year-old owner in Kansas has no chance at all. And the paperwork problem does not end there. The formula needs your complete 100-hour inspection history across the whole life of the airframe. On a 1968 Cherokee with 4 owners, whole decades of that history are missing. Missing logbooks do not get you an exemption. They move you to the front of the queue. Under the current rule, incomplete records mean you inspect within 100 hours or 60 days, regardless of your number. Piper's own bulletin cuts that to 50 hours. Paper you cannot produce becomes evidence against you. Then the bill arrives and the FAA published this part itself. Replacing one Spar runs $14,383. That is one wing. A 2-wing job is $28,766 on airframes that trade in the $60,000 to $90,000 range. The approved reinforcement kit installed runs $20,150 per Spar. The fix costs more than replacing the part it fixes. That is not my arithmetic. It is the agency's own cost table, and AOPA noted, the FAA admitted it has no way to know how many airplanes would need either job. There is one more line in that proposal, and it is the one that should worry an Arrow owner most. For the Arrow 200, and every airframe the FAA put in its second group, there is no reinforcement kit at all. No kit means replacement is the only exit. And replacement spars are the scarce item in the whole supply chain. Comments closed on the 9th of December, 2024. 20 months later, the FAA has issued nothing. No final rule, no withdrawal, and not one sentence explaining the silence. Both proposals are still sitting there, and the agency's own text calls the inspections an interim action with no final action determined. So where does that leave the honest verdict? 2 people died at Daytona and the crack was invisible. A second airplane in the same fleet was carrying the same crack under 2,000 hours from doing it again. Nobody invented that. The failure mode is real and it gives no warning. But after 2,800 inspections and 20 months of silence, one fact will not go away. Nobody looked at your wing. The FAA has never examined your spar, never pulled a bolt, never run an eddy current probe across your bolt holes. It counted how many 100-hour inspections somebody wrote in a book. That is a form you never had to file because you never flew a paying passenger in your life. Then it multiplied. The number that may retire your airplane is not a measurement. It is a count of paperwork, standing in for a life story nobody bothered to check. That is the thing worth carrying out of this. Every regulation that governs an old machine eventually stops measuring the machine and starts measuring the record. The record is cheaper to read. The record scales. And the record is always, always about somebody other than you. Once you see that swap happen, you will see it behind every airworthiness directive that lands on a 50-year-old airframe. That is what Sky Ranch does. Subscribe so you catch the next one before it reaches your hangar.